checking your phone, waiting for their name to light up. Your mind replays every detail, every word, every pause, every unfinished sentence. Meanwhile, on their side, they feel calm. They think they're in control. Silence, to them, has always meant power. But then days pass, and you don't reach out. And suddenly, that silence, their greatest weapon, starts turning into a mirror. The ego that once thrived on being chased begins to tremble. The control they thought they had starts to slip, because silence doesn't belong to the one who creates it. It belongs to the one who masters it. The game doesn't flip when you speak. It flips when you stop reacting. When your silence becomes intentional, calm, disciplined, stoic, that's when the power shifts. Not through noise, but through composure. Welcome to the art of quiet transformation, where you stop chasing closure and become it. It always begins quietly. No grand ending, no closure, just an abrupt stop, two souls detaching, leaving behind an echo that lingers in the air. To outsiders, it looks like indifference, but to those inside the silence, it's psychological warfare wrapped in calm. Because silence doesn't just separate two people, it reveals who they truly are without each other's noise. When contact stops, the energy resets. For a moment, both stand still. No messages, no validation, no performance. And in that stillness, something strange happens. You begin to feel the weight of what used to be automatic. The waiting, the chasing, the endless search for response. Your nervous system, once addicted to reaction, doesn't know what to do with quiet. It shakes. It reaches for something familiar, but there's nothing there. This is where the real work begins. Because the Stoics taught that when the world grows silent, the mind begins to speak. And what it says can either enslave you or free you. For those who always needed connection to feel secure, silence feels like punishment. But for those who learn to face it, silence becomes initiation, a rite of passage back to self-control. It's the moment your emotions demand your attention. Can you stand without reassurance? Can you hold your peace without their validation? Can you stop chasing what no longer respects your energy when both sides fall silent? The illusion of control starts to dissolve. The avoidant, who once used withdrawal as a shield, begins to lose their advantage because distance no longer provokes you. And you, the one who always bridged the gap, begin to breathe again. The space that used to feel unbearable now becomes sacred. It's not a void anymore, it's clarity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That is exactly what begins here. When the noise stops, your peace becomes your power. You start realizing that the absence of words doesn't mean the absence of meaning, it means the beginning of wisdom. The game resets the moment you stop performing for attention. When you stop measuring your worth by how quickly they reply, when you stop running toward what keeps walking away, in that moment, silence is no longer something happening to you, it becomes something happening for you. That's when control returns. Not over them, but over yourself. And once you master that, No one ever holds power over you again. For the dismissive avoidant, silence has always been home. It's where they hide, recharge, and regain a false sense of control. They've trained themselves to believe that pulling away equals power, that distance means safety. In their mind, emotions are dangerous. Vulnerability feels like a trap. So every time closeness starts to stir something real, they disappear behind walls of indifference. To them, silence isn't cold, it's survival. When contact ends, they feel relief first. They breathe easier, thinking they've escaped pressure. No more emotional demands. No more having to confront what they can't handle. They convince themselves they've regained control. But control built on avoidance is never real. It's borrowed time. Because silence, to the Stoic mind, is not just the absence of noise, it's the presence of truth. And truth doesn't stay buried. It echoes. The longer they sit in their silence, the louder that echo becomes. At first, it's just a faint whisper. Why haven't they reached out? It's easy to dismiss a passing curiosity. But days turn to weeks, and curiosity grows teeth. They check your profile. They hover over your messages. They scroll through old photos, pretending not to care. And the silence, the one they thought they controlled, begins to turn on them. Because silence doesn't stay neutral, it shifts power. The one who can bear it longer begins to lead the dynamic, and suddenly, the avoidant who once dictated the rhythm starts reacting to the absence they created. This is the paradox of avoidance. They build emotional walls to avoid pain, but those same walls become their prison. They believe distance protects them, but it's the very distance that exposes their dependence on being chased. When you don't reach out, the script breaks. Their ego, once inflated by your pursuit, begins to deflate in quiet confusion. They told themselves they didn't need you, but the silence makes them realize they needed your reaction to feel powerful. They needed your emotional labor to maintain the illusion of control. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And in this silence, their reaction reveals everything. They don't react with peace, they react with subtle panic, disguised as detachment. They may post casually online, acting unbothered. They may send half-hearted signals, a like here, a short comment there, not because they want connection, but because they crave confirmation that you still orbit them. But when those signals fall into the void unanswered, their so-called power begins to fracture. Because silence, when unmastered, becomes confrontation. It forces the avoidant to face what they've been running from. Not you, but themselves. They start to realize that the emotional armor they wear doesn't make them invincible. It just makes them lonely. The space they thought was protection now feels like exile. And that's when the mirror turns. While they crumble quietly in confusion, you begin to stabilize in peace. Their silence was supposed to make you weak, but your stillness is making you stronger. The avoidance false control depended on your reaction. Now, your silence has stripped that power away, and what's left isn't dominance, it's exposure. The Stoics taught that mastery is not control over others, but control over self. The avoidant sought to control emotion through retreat. You're learning to control emotion through discipline. And that difference is what flips the game. Because in the quiet, the one who runs from silence will always be ruled by it. But the one who embraces it becomes free. For the empath, the feeler, the fixer, the one who loved with both hands open, silence feels like withdrawal from oxygen. At first, it isn't peace. It's panic. The quiet feels too loud. You check your phone 100 times. You rehearse imaginary conversations. You wonder if they ever think about you, if they ever cared, if you mattered at all. This is where the storm brews, not outside, but within, because for so long, you built your emotional identity around response. You measured connection by how often they replied, by how quickly they returned your energy. And when that loop ends, your nervous system screams. But here's where your awakening begins. The Stoics taught you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. What you're feeling isn't rejection, it's withdrawal. You're detoxing from the illusion that love equals pursuit. You're unlearning the reflex that says, if they pull away, chase harder. The first days of silence test everything: your patience, your self-worth, your emotional intelligence. Your body wants to act, to fix, to send just one message, to ease the ache. But the discipline of a Stoic heart begins right here, in that moment between urge and action, when you learn to sit inside discomfort instead of escaping it. Something shifts. That ache you feel isn't weakness. It's transformation in progress. It's your soul expanding beyond dependency. You start to see what you couldn't when the noise was constant, how much effort you spent keeping the connection alive alone, how many times you accepted half love because you feared losing any at all. You begin to realize that silence isn't their punishment, it's your teacher. Every moment you don't reach out, your energy recalibrates. The part of you that was once reactive learns restraint. The part that was desperate for reassurance starts drawing power from self-recognition. You start to see that love isn't proven by chasing, it's revealed through calm consistency. And that's the paradox of emotional intelligence. It doesn't erase emotion, it refines it. You don't stop feeling, you start feeling accurately. You stop mistaking anxiety for connection, silence for rejection, distance for death. You start to understand that their silence doesn't define your value, your response to it does. In this space, something sacred happens. Detachment is born not from coldness, but from clarity. You stop needing their validation to breathe. You begin to build your peace like a fortress around your spirit. Every hour of silence becomes training. Every night you don't send that text. You prove to yourself that your peace is stronger than your impulses. And slowly, subtly, something inside you steadies. Your thoughts stop chasing. Your emotions stop begging. You begin to feel calm, not numb calm. That calm is the first true glimpse of freedom, because Stoicism doesn't mean suppressing pain, it means mastering response. You learn to observe your thoughts without being pulled by them, to sit in longing without becoming enslaved by it. This is what the Stoics called apatheia, the stillness of the mind that remains unshaken by chaos. They used silence to test their discipline. You're using it to rebuild your soul. And as you grow comfortable in that stillness, the power dynamic quietly shifts. The one who was once reactive becomes centered. The one who relied on your reaction begins to feel unease. Your awakening isn't about indifference, it's about balance. It's the moment you realize, I no longer need to be understood to be at peace. You've crossed the threshold between emotional dependence and emotional mastery. And from this point on, every move you make comes from intention, not insecurity. That's the essence of the empath's awakening, not to love less, but to love wiser, to no longer chase what drains you, but protect what sustains you. And once that shift happens, you'll never see silence the same way again. The world teaches you to fight for closure, to chase answers, to demand explanation. But the Stoics knew better. Power doesn't return through noise. It returns through silence. At first, silence feels like surrender. It looks like you've given up. But what's really happening beneath the surface is that energy is being redistributed. The person who reacts the least begins to control the rhythm. And slowly, the entire emotional dynamic starts to bend. This is the invisible power shift. No arguments, no confrontation, just a subtle rebalancing of emotional gravity. You see, the avoidant mind survives on predictability. Your messages, your reassurance, your attempts to bridge the gap. Those were the emotional cues that confirmed their control. But now, your absence interrupts the pattern. Their control system loses fuel. And silence, once their comfort zone starts to feel unfamiliar. What was once safety now feels like uncertainty. Because power in human dynamics is never static. It flows toward whoever holds composure. When you no longer chase, they begin to orbit you. The Stoics called this ataraxia, a state of calm so strong it becomes gravitational. People can feel when your peace is real. They can sense when your silence isn't reactive, but rooted. That calmness pulls them in, not through manipulation, but through the magnetism of emotional control. The one who used to fear losing you now starts to wonder if they already have. They open old messages, not to relive the past, but to understand how it slipped away. They feel the void where your energy used to be. It's quiet, but it's not empty. It's filled with your absence. And your absence now speaks louder than your presence ever did. This is where the game flips. The power doesn't lie in who cares less, it lies in who needs less. When you stop needing reassurance to stay centered, you become emotionally untouchable. Remember this Stoic principle: no man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. Freedom doesn't come when they text you back. It comes when you stop needing them to. At this stage, they begin to test the silence. A like, a random message, a subtle breadcrumb. It's not vulnerability, it's ego maintenance. They want to see if you're still emotionally available, if you'll break the silence first, if they can still provoke a reaction. But you've changed. You don't play the same game anymore. You don't assign meaning to every signal. You let them sit unanswered, not out of spite, but out of strength. Because silence isn't about punishment, it's about preservation. Every time you hold your ground, your self-worth expands. Every second you don't react, your power compounds. Your peace becomes the language they can't speak, and the very thing that exposes their lack of it. They start to feel what you once felt: uncertainty, curiosity, loss of control. That's the shift. The hunter becomes haunted, the avoidant becomes anxious, and the empath becomes centered. This is the quiet symmetry of emotional balance. You no longer chase, you attract. Not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped feeding theirs. When the Stoics spoke of victory, they didn't mean conquest. They meant command over self. And in this silence, that command is reborn. No words, no threats, no proving. Just the stillness of a person who no longer dances to anyone else's rhythm. The invisible power shift isn't loud, it's deliberate. It's when you stop fighting to be heard and let your peace do the talking. There's a moment when silence stops being about them and starts being about you. At first, it feels like you're waiting for a message, waiting for clarity, waiting for the silence to end. But the longer it continues, the more you realize you're not waiting for them to reach out, you're waiting for yourself to return. This is where psychological boundaries are born, not in confrontation, but in stillness. You start to notice the reflexes you never questioned before. How quickly you'd reply, even when your energy felt drained. How easily you'd explain yourself, even when you owed no explanation. How much peace you sacrificed to preserve a connection that was already fading. Now, in the quiet, all of that becomes visible. The noise has cleared, and you can finally hear yourself again. Stoicism teaches that true freedom begins when you no longer hand over control of your emotions to someone else. Boundaries aren't walls, they're gates. They don't block love, they protect it. They separate what nourishes you from what depletes you. In this silence, your boundaries start to form, not through anger, but through awareness. You start asking yourself questions you used to avoid. Why did I allow their inconsistency to define my worth? Why did I chase clarity from someone who thrives in confusion? And most importantly, why did I confuse peace with boredom? You begin to understand something profound. You were never addicted to them. You were addicted to the version of yourself that existed around them, the one constantly trying to prove, fix, and earn love. Now that silence has stripped away the illusion. You're left with the truth. Your energy was never meant to be spent on proving your value. It was meant to be invested in protecting it. This is the silent transformation. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You stop being available to people who treat your presence as optional, not because you're bitter, but because you're awake. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." The same principle applies to boundaries. Stop explaining your worth. Start embodying it. Every time you choose not to react, you're teaching your nervous system a new lesson. I don't need to chase to be chosen. Every time you resist the urge to reach out, you strengthen the muscle of restraint. Every time you hold silence with dignity instead of desperation, you affirm your self-worth. And slowly, your peace stops being fragile. It becomes your baseline. The avoidant may start to notice your absence, but you no longer notice theirs the same way. Their silence no longer provokes anxiety. It reveals alignment. It shows you where effort ends and self-respect begins. Boundaries formed in silence are different from boundaries built in anger. Anger créat distance. Discipline creates balance. When your silence comes from discipline, not pride, it carries gravity. It says, I choose peace over performance. That's the essence of spiritual discipline, learning to remain centered while the world around you shakes. You become less reactive, more intentional, less emotional, more conscious. You stop being the person who explains yourself to be understood and start being the person who understands without needing to explain. This is how silence shapes your identity. It teaches you where you end and others begin. It teaches you that no response is also a response, one that says, my energy is no longer for rent. Because once you've built these psychological boundaries, you no longer chase connection, you choose it. And when connection becomes a choice, not a compulsion, you become untouchable. That's what true Stoic strength looks like, not stone-cold indifference, but calm clarity that refuses to be shaken. For a long time, their silence felt like dominance. They disappeared without hesitation, and you stayed behind, questioning what went wrong. They seemed composed, detached, untouchable. But silence is a mirror, not a weapon. And over time, even the strongest armor begins to reflect what it was built to hide. At first, the dismissive avoidant feels relief. No pressure, no expectations, no emotional demands. Their space feels clean again, free of intimacy that once felt suffocating. They convince themselves that peace has returned, but it isn't peace. It's numbness. They scroll through their feed. They glance at your profile out of habit. They tell themselves they don't care, yet their curiosity betrays them. Why hasn't your name appeared? Why haven't you reached out? That quiet question plants a seed they can't ignore. For the first time, silence no longer feels like safety. It feels like absence, a presence that's missing, because what once made them feel powerful now feels unstable. Your silence has flipped the dynamic they used to withdraw to gain control. But now that control has turned into isolation, the Stoics taught that false power always collapses under truth. What they mistook for strength, emotional distance, was merely avoidance of pain. And when you stopped chasing, you unknowingly forced them to face that pain alone. Now the echoes begin. Late at night, in quiet rooms, when distraction runs out and their thoughts finally settle, they replay memories not because they miss you, but because they're trying to understand how they lost control of a pattern they thought they owned. This is where their armor cracks. The ego begins to tremble beneath the surface. They used to feel safe knowing you'd always return, that no matter how far they retreated, you'd find a way to pull them back into connection. But now, there's only quiet. And that quiet reveals what they've spent their life avoiding: the fear of being forgotten. They may try to mask it with distractions, new connections, bravado. But the mind doesn't forget what the heart refuses to face. And when they sense your emotional detachment, your calm, your absence, their subconscious begins to panic. They start to test a like, a comment, a random message. It's not love, it's curiosity mixed with fear. They want to see if they still matter. They want to confirm that the door remains open. But you've changed. You've evolved beyond their cycle. This is where inner peace becomes your armor. You no longer need to respond to feel seen. Your silence is not reaction, it's resolution. You've learned that peace is not found in being understood, it's found in no longer needing to be. And so, as their walls begin to tremble, yours become steady. You're not chasing closure. You are closure. Because true closure doesn't come from what they say, it comes from who you've become in the silence. Their composure fades. But yours remains. Their control dissolves. But your clarity grows. And in that stillness, you finally see the truth the Stoics always spoke of. He who conquers himself is mightier than he who conquers cities. Epictetus. You've conquered your impulses. You've mastered the noise within. And now, their armor, once the symbol of power, has become their prison. The silence that once belonged to them now belongs to you. Because you've learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Nothing terrifies the avoidant more than someone who no longer needs them. That's when their calm begins to crumble, and your peace becomes untouchable. Silence used to feel like emptiness. Now, it feels like reflection. When two people stop contacting each other, most think nothing is happening. But in truth, a mirror has been placed between them, invisible, yet undeniable. And slowly, that mirror begins to show each side who they really are. For them, the avoidant, the emotionally armored, that mirror exposes everything they've refused to see. Their control, their fear, their avoidance of vulnerability, all the things they once projected onto you are now reflected back at them. Your absence becomes their confrontation. Because here's the hidden truth. Avoidants don't fear closeness, they fear seeing themselves in it. They fear what real intimacy might reveal, the unresolved wounds beneath their detachment. And when you're gone, the distraction is gone too. There's no one left to absorb their projections. So, the silence they once used as protection turns into exposure. In the quiet, their mind replays old moments, not for nostalgia, but for validation. They search for evidence that you still care, that they still matter. But your stillness gives them nothing to hold on to. They look into the mirror of absence, and for the first time, they see themselves clearly. That's when confusion begins to replace confidence. They thought they were immune to missing you. They believed they could detach without consequence. But the mirror doesn't lie. It reflects the emptiness that control can't fill. And control, once their strongest weapon, becomes useless without a reaction. For you, the mirror shows something different. It doesn't reflect pain anymore. It reflects growth. You begin to see the person you've become through stillness, stronger, calmer, wiser. You realize you never needed closure, because silence gave you truth. It showed you that peace isn't earned by fixing others, it's found by mastering yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And in this silence, your thoughts have changed color. They're no longer painted by longing or resentment, but by discipline, clarity, and inner peace. You start to move differently. You respond less and observe more. You give energy only where it returns with respect. Your absence no longer hides pain. It communicates standards. It says, without words, I no longer chase comfort in chaos. I no longer negotiate my peace. I no longer confuse attention with affection. That's the mirror effect. What you withdraw becomes what they must face. What you withhold becomes what they must confront. What you once gave freely emotional presence, empathy, reassurance is now gone, and its absence reveals just how much of the connection was sustained by your effort. You no longer need to prove you care. Your restraint proves you've learned. You no longer need to be seen. Your silence shows you've seen enough. This is when the energy flips entirely. The one who once felt power in detachment begins to feel small in their distance. The one who once felt powerless in love begins to feel free in solitude. The mirror doesn't punish, it reveals. It shows that control without compassion is loneliness, that avoidance without awareness is exile, and that detachment without discipline isn't peace, it's paralysis. Meanwhile, your silence grows softer but deeper. It's no longer a wall, it's a boundary. It's no longer resistance, it's wisdom. You're not withholding, you're guarding, not reacting, reflecting. The Stoics called this self-possession, a state where nothing outside of you can disturb the calm within you. That's the ultimate form of power, quiet, invisible, and undeniable. And that's what they feel now. The pull of your energy no longer available. The gravity of your presence that used to orbit around them now gone. They may not understand it logically, but emotionally, they sense it. The game has flipped, and they're no longer in control of the silence. Because silence is no longer their weapon. It's your mirror. And it's showing both of you exactly what was hidden all along. Detachment isn't indifference. It's understanding at a level so deep that emotion no longer dictates your actions. It's what happens when pain has done its work, and peace finally takes its place. Most people think healing means not caring anymore. But the Stoics knew true healing is when you care differently. You no longer love from fear. You no longer chase what confuses you. You no longer need closure to move forward. This is the essence of detachment, the quiet power that comes when your emotions serve you, not control you. At this stage, something inside you has shifted permanently. You no longer wake up with anxiety about their silence. You no longer check your phone for signs of validation. The craving that once consumed your thoughts has lost its grip. You've seen the cycle too clearly to ever return to it. You've watched what chasing does to your dignity. You've felt what self-restraint does for your peace. And now, that clarity has rewired your emotional reflexes. For the first time, your energy is yours again. You're not spending it on decoding mixed signals or analyzing breadcrumbs. You're redirecting it into your craft, your growth, your purpose. Silence, once suffocating, now feels like air. The Stoics taught that peace isn't given, it's trained. And you've trained for this. Through every night you resisted the urge to text. Through every wave of emotion you observed instead of obeyed. Through every temptation to react that you met with stillness. That wasn't weakness, it was emotional strength in disguise. Now, detachment becomes a way of living. You don't need to explain your silence. It explains itself. You don't seek revenge. Your peace delivers it. You don't perform calmness. You are calmness. The avoidant, meanwhile, begins to feel what they once made you feel: uncertainty. They look for the emotional cues they used to depend on your attention, your warmth, your presence. But the energy field has changed. Your silence no longer feels like waiting, it feels like sovereignty. And that's what disturbs them most. Because detachment doesn't just remove your emotional dependency, it removes their psychological leverage. They can no longer pull the strings that once made you move. They can no longer predict your reactions. And in that unpredictability, their ego loses balance. They may reappear, subtly or dramatically. They may test your calm. They may offer words they never could say before. But you've evolved beyond the bait. You no longer confuse attention for accountability. You no longer trade your peace for closure. Your silence has taught you a higher form of language restraint. It speaks volumes without a single word. It says, I see everything, but I choose peace. I feel everything, but I act with wisdom. I remember everything, but I hold nothing. That's what emotional intelligence truly is, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. It's choosing inner order over external validation. It's walking away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself correctly. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let no man pull you so low as to hate him." That's what detachment gives you: the power to observe betrayal, disrespect, and manipulation without letting them poison your character. You become untouchable, not because you're emotionless, but because you're emotionally disciplined. You've mastered the art of non-reaction. You no longer swing between love and resentment. You remain still deliberate, dignified, detached. Detachment doesn't end the story. It rewrites it. It transforms silence from something that happened to you into something that happened for you. It takes what was once your weakness and turns it into your weapon. Now, when they think of you, they don't remember the person who chased. They remember the person who disappeared into calmness and never returned. Not out of bitterness, but out of evolution. And that's the final flip, when silence stops being defense and becomes direction. When peace stops being fragile and becomes power. When you stop waiting for them to change, because you already did. Time passes, and the silence that once protected them begins to haunt them. The dismissive avoidant who once wore distance like armor now finds that armor turning heavy. At first, they told themselves stories to stay safe. I needed space. I'm better alone. They'll come back eventually. But space, when met with no pursuit, turns from comfort into emptiness. They scroll through their phone late at night, hovering over your old messages. They look at your profile without interacting, convincing themselves they're just curious. But what they're really doing is confronting the reality they once denied. You're not coming back. The silence that once made them feel powerful now reflects their own irrelevance. And that realization cuts deeper than any argument ever could. Because you didn't punish them, you simply stopped participating. The Stoics understood this perfectly. Epictetus once said, "What disturbs men is not things, but their opinions about things." They're not suffering because of your silence, they're suffering because of what it means. It means their control was an illusion. It means you learned to exist without them. It means the game they built no longer works on you. And that realization flips everything. Now, every time your name crosses their mind, it carries weight, not because of nostalgia, but because of what your absence represents: freedom they didn't expect you to find. They sense it when they see your calmness, your focus, your quiet growth. You're not reacting. You're not reaching. You're not waiting. You've become still, and that stillness is magnetic. They'll test the waters again, a random message, a subtle reaction, a breadcrumb to see if the door is still open. But your silence now speaks a different language. It's not cold. It's composed. It says, "I've heard this story before, and I no longer need to read it again." The real power isn't in making them regret losing you. It's in no longer needing them to. Their discomfort is not your goal. Your peace is your proof. Because peace is louder than pain, and silence echoes longer than words ever could. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. You don't return to prove your worth. Your detachment already did. You don't explain why you left your calm, made it obvious." And as they stand in the ruins of their own distance, they finally understand what your silence truly meant. You didn't disappear to hurt them, you disappeared to find yourself. And that's something they can feel but never control. The consequence of losing someone grounded in self-mastery isn't loneliness. It's realizing too late that peace was the thing they couldn't fake. At some point, you stop waiting for the noise to return. You stop checking your phone. You stop wondering what they're thinking. The silence that once felt like a punishment now feels like home. Because silence, when mastered, becomes power. It's no longer a void to escape from. It's a throne you sit on, built from restraint, self-control, and emotional intelligence. This is where the Stoic victory happens, not in the external world, but within you, not when they regret losing you, but when you no longer need their regret to validate your worth. You've learned what most never do, that peace is the loudest presence in any room. While others chase attention, you cultivate composure. While they perform strength, you embody it. Your calmness unsettles the unhealed. Your silence exposes the insecure, and your discipline protects the energy they once drained. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That's the essence of this final stage, self-mastery. You no longer react to disrespect. You remove yourself from it. You no longer argue to be understood. You understand in silence and move accordingly. You no longer fight for closure. You become it. Silence becomes your boundary, your armor, your message. Because when you stop engaging with chaos, you stop being consumed by it. When you stop explaining your worth, you start living it. And when you stop trying to change others, you finally change yourself. This is not detachment born from bitterness. It's clarity born from wisdom. You see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. You choose inner peace over emotional performance. And you realize that not everyone deserves access to your energy. especially those who mistake kindness for weakness. You've become the calm that chaos can't reach. You've learned to walk away without slamming doors. You've turned absence into awareness, and in doing so, you've achieved what the Stoics called ataraxia, unshakable tranquility. Now, when they think of you, they feel it, the strength in your silence, the dignity in your distance, the serenity in your detachment. They used to control the rhythm. Now you move in your own tempo, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The final victory is not them missing you. It's you no longer needing them to. It's standing in the stillness of your own life, calm, whole, unbothered, and realizing that silence was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of your power, because when you master silence, you no longer chase peace, you become it. When you stop chasing, something remarkable happens. The world doesn't end, it rearranges itself. The people who were once your center fade quietly into the background, and you realize you were the gravity all along. Silence didn't break you. It revealed you. It showed you where your energy went, who truly valued it, and what peace feels like when you finally protect it. This was never about punishing anyone. It was about remembering yourself. You learned that love built on fear isn't love, it's dependence. You learned that connection without reciprocity isn't intimacy, it's exhaustion. And you learned that silence, when chosen consciously, isn't withdrawal, it's wisdom. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Your thoughts now are calmer, clearer, sharper. You've stepped out of the emotional storm and into the eye of it, the place of stillness that no one can take from you. And from that place, you'll never beg for peace again, because you are peace. If this message resonated with you, drop a lock in the comments to say, "I protect my peace,"